So just to set the table a little bit, you remember the session this morning from Franklin and SAP and this crystal ball thing? That won't be this. This is not probably going to be a lot about corporate strategy, getting a full company view. We're going to drill down really into where we see a lot of the companies and teams really fighting through. That's where sales and marketing meet and where they divide and how you navigate that process. Hey, if we get to the outskirts and more of that, then all power to it. So let's start, before we introduce the panel, let's start with a poll. So the first poll is open. Where are you and your colleagues on the journey to using intelligent and intent data in your revenue generation efforts? So we're going to be pretty specific. We're new to intent data, just getting started. We are providing intent data to our sales team. We have widespread adoption across our sales and marketing team. We are confidently using intent data in multiple applications. Paul, I'll start with you.
Number two.
Drum roll, please. 49% were new to intent and just getting started.
All right.
And that is our thesis.
Bam.
And I think what the Bompora team has been a lightning rod in our industry to carry that through, to help people on this journey. Why the Bompora application framework? Why the focus of the use cases? And that's reality. So our first part of our therapy is everybody's kind of in the same boat. And today with our panel, what we hope to do is, this is a group that's been on the journey, a few of us a few times, so that's what we're going to illuminate. So why don't we go ahead and introduce ourselves. Matt, I'll start with you if you don't mind. Name, company, and just a little bit of your why you're on the sales marketing and the one team intent journey.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. Matt Diorio, the Global Head of Growth Marketing at MetLife. So why are we on this journey? So at MetLife, we have B2B, B2C, B2B2C. We have tons of different distribution models. And so we actually stood up the growth marketing function within the center of our global brand and marketing team about 2 years ago, to ensure that marketing is a predictable contribution to sales. And so part of that, and what my team does, is work with our business partners, our sales organizations, to ensure that we are identifying where pools of value exist in our businesses, identifying what is the right work that we need to do, and then actually standing up agile teams to go ahead and deliver on that value. And so we're still on this journey, but that's a big part of what we do. And intent data and demand generation overall is a big factor of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to instill within the overall marketing and sales organization.
Okay, so that's our table setter, kind of where you are. Putney, you've done this at a few companies now. Tell us a little bit about your journey, where you are today, and just your general view.
Sure. So my name is Putney. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Cision. I've had two journeys that are notable. One was when I was at American Express, and that was about really bringing marketing and sales together to address two forces at the time. One was a sales organization that we needed to increase the ROI of a very large investment. They were largely doing just straight outbound cold calling, and we were getting pressure to increase the return on that investment. And secondly, and we haven't talked about this today, the regulatory environment in banking made it that cold calling was less and less feasible. And so we were looking at a way to really fuel the organization. I think what was interesting there was that was a very sophisticated, or thought of themselves as a sophisticated sales organization, which is a different challenge than I'm having today at Cision, where we're looking at across the board trying to fuel our sales teams, particularly prospecting, but also retention and cross-sell using intelligence. And I would say respectfully, Cision as an organization for go-to-market and our sales organization is less sophisticated than the American Express team was. I'm not saying one is easier or harder. They're just different and should be thought about differently.
And we'll break those down, Putney, a little bit as we get deeper into the conversations. Paul, who are you? Why are you here?
Ooh, boy,
What mission
therapy.
are you on?
Therapy 101. So I'm Paul Green. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all today. So I work at a company, Extreme Networks. We do networking gear. And, you know, it's interesting. My story is one of where I've been, and I'm going to talk a little about that, and then kind of where we're headed today. And it's interesting, at the last Intent event, I was on stage with a sales leader. And you talk about sales and marketing being aligned. We had a joint presentation, and it went swimmingly. And at that time, they loved what we did for them. We had acquired a whole bunch of companies, and we needed account strategies and mentality to go after different accounts. And so roll it forward, business changes, sales leaders change, marketing leaders change, and everything that I was talking about 3 years ago, I couldn't talk about today because we're very different as a company. And so my journey has gone from living the dream of sales and marketing alignment intentionally to now complete rebuild. And so today we are starting from scratch. You know, believe it or not, our inside sales team, that was a main purveyor of the data, they were redistributed 2 years ago for a bunch of sales reasons. And so now you have your main contributor to the intelligence gone. And so now marketing, believe it or not, is spinning up a BDR organization. So for me, it's like rebirth again. And, you know, the one thing I would just say to all of you, and it's great that 50% of you are just starting out, be adaptable. Like, you're not going to hear a story. None of our stories are the same. The way we use it probably isn't the same. The way we activate it isn't. Yes, there are themes that are probably fit over all of us, but, you know, how you go to market with your company and your team, because this is a team sport, is really different. And so hopefully that's going to come out as we all talk about this. And the one thing I would say, this is a great event. You all are super smart business people. It's why I love being here. You know, afterwards, dinner, lunch, grab each other, learn, talk, challenge. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, you can tell you've been through the ringer. I was going to say through the process a few times. So our first lesson is the sales and marketing relationship and the love affair can go astray like any relationship. We'll break that down. Okay, so that's our table setter. We got a feel for their organization, a little bit what they are. Okay, Matt. What role does intent play specifically in bringing this one team, one dream, or sales and marketing together? And how do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think first, just to set a little bit of context. So the way that we're leveraging intent data is primarily right now the use case with our group benefits business. So we sell voluntary benefits to employers, but the model is pretty complicated. So we have account executives who are our sales force. They have to convince brokers to sell our products, voluntary products, into employers, right? And then those employers have to then offer it to employees to be able to purchase it, right? So there's a lot of potential friction points along that journey. And so from an intent data perspective, we kind of had a perfect storm of sorts about 2 years ago. First, obviously, it was COVID, so steak dinners and MetLife Stadium trips, right, were not happening. Second, the business signed up for double-digit CAGR growth, which was a huge push for them. And third, we had a new SVP head of sales for all of group benefits. And so we basically sat down to say, okay, how can we partner together to help you achieve your results? And so we actually mapped out a truly omni-channel, cross-channel journey experience, mapping out what the current sales process was, which was fairly manual. There was no digital interactions, and basically did a what's the art of the possible? How can we actually help you? There was two main things that they were looking for. One, they knew all of the brokers that they needed to reach out to, but they needed more meaningful conversations with those brokers. And two, everything they were doing from a communication perspective was manual. I mean, everything. The entire communication process from a salesperson to a broker was literally an AE having to go in and actually manually send content, emails, et cetera.
Can I ask you a question on that?
Yeah.
So I'm picturing your meeting, you're with the team, and someone says, we need to map the customer journey. Do we all put that one slide up that says there's multiple players and we How'd you do that? How'd you
So
map?
we literally sat down and whiteboarded it out. And we actually brought in a third-party consultant at the time, so it didn't feel subjective, right? It was a very objective process to help us map that out. And what we realized that there was obviously gaps and huge opportunities. And so I think first was getting them over the hump of saying, yes, digital can play a role in the sales journey. And then secondly, to your question on intent data, it was, okay, we knew that our account executives have specific moments and times when they're going to have meetings with these brokers, right? These intermediaries. And we said, they said, we need more data. We need more insights. So we said, okay, well, maybe we can help you. And so what we did was we would take a look at all of our first party data, which sat in 7 or 8 different places, right? We had financial data, opportunity data in Salesforce, the list goes on. And then we overlaid that with intent data. And so basically what we did was we were able to then spit out an email to them to say, okay, you might have been selling vision and dental to this certain employer, but guess what? They're actually over-indexing, or we're seeing surges in these 3 other products. So in your sales meeting, your stewardship meeting next week, right, these are potential opportunities for you. And so basically what we did is we would arm them with additional intelligence and insights for those sales meetings that they had. The second piece on the intent data piece was the manual to automated side of how they communicated. And so what we did was we took that intent data and it informed our content strategy, as well as then automating nurture campaigns on their behalf. So again, similar, we would say, okay, we're seeing that these employers or these brokers are surging for pet or dental or vision. So let's trigger automated nurture campaigns based off of what they're surging. And so in the past, these AEs would literally just send whatever they felt like sending, right? Now it's all automated for them, but it actually looks and feels like it's coming from the AE themselves. So it actually looks like John is sending a note to the broker on product benefits, the offers that we have, et cetera. And so it completely automated the process for them. Last thing I'll say, and then I'll pause it. This took a lot of work to do, right? We had to bring in data scientists to come in to be able to stitch the data together. It was a very long journey to get us to where we are today.
How long, Matt? Just give us a sense.
So I think it took about, to get it up and running, because we actually stood up an agile team to do this. It only actually took a few months to get the program up and running. But to be honest with you, to get it to where it actually needed to be took another probably 6 months, right? To be able to actually do a lot of the back-end automation that we needed to do to actually make this work, so that way we're reducing friction in the process and truly providing value to the sales force.
So it starts with first-party data, and you have to have a little patience. I'm hearing that you have to see it through, and you sat down with sales as part of the process, yeah. And you have complications because you have brokers and other players, other actors in the movie that you have to navigate. Okay. Honey, we'll just keep our momentum going. I love what you said about there were 2 key drivers, if I got that right. There was the ROI on marketing and getting more out of marketing and sales together, but there was also some realities of regulatory, and we can't just be blasting people and et cetera. Can you paint that picture a little bit for us?
Sure. So we had a sales team that I think was about 200 folks on the phones. They would get 450 leads a month. They were prioritized based on firmographic data only, and they would dial through them. And this team was pretty good. Like, they hit their numbers. We would take their numbers up every year, and they'd continue to hit them. But in the environment that we were in with a bunch of consumer regulatory dynamics, we were uncomfortable, frankly, with having our sales team continue to operate that way. And then there was the pressure to say, we're making a huge investment in all these humans. How do we make them more effective? And so we went on a journey to try to think about what are all the signals, sort of Bombora, intent, and other. What are the behavioral signals that we can append to our 450 leads per month in order to help our team members understand both who to call, so who's actually in market, what are they in market for, and I think importantly for us also, was what sort of conversation should you be opening up with based on what we know that they're interested in? So linking to the presentation that was given earlier where they talked about content, essentially, and how you drive content through intent. Essentially, that's what we were thinking about, is rather than essentially having a phone call where you say, hey, are you interested in getting a credit card? How can we open up a conversation with more a consultative approach, which is more attractive to the prospect, seen as less probably sort of predatory, frankly, and start to open up a conversation about what American Express could offer. And all of that came from us being able to give them the digital signals, Bombora and others, that would allow them to understand whether the prospect was in market, what they would be in market for, and how to have that conversation.
So I have some a thought about that. My immediate reaction is I love your who, what, when, why. That's a great thing on a simplicity. I've seen that done before. Who to, what can you offer them? When can you offer it? And why? What do you say? That to me is very simple. I love also the fact that you talked about how did that, I'm going to use this word, training go to help sales with that adjustment, to the adjustment you described. What role did you have to play, or I'm just getting to know you, but watching how you think, you probably brought in an RV behind the scenes and worked to tell us about that experience.
I think the word was bossy.
We call it fierce.
So we actually started, I sort of paint a picture as if it was all done to begin with. We did start with a small group of early adopters who we thought who were both high performing sales colleagues, but we also thought would be willing and able to take on the challenge and then become advocates going forwards. Because I don't know how you guys feel, but I've always felt as a marketer in the B2B space, like a lot of pressure, right? What we do actually affects materially the income of our sales colleagues. And so feeling that pressure, there's one, an adoption model that says start with a small group and become advocates, but also, frankly, I wanted to make sure it was going to work, right? I didn't want to go screwing up their income for the year or the sales numbers for the year. So we started with a small group, and then they became advocates going forwards and allowed us to really learn how to make the new way of working work, which I want to be clear, and I don't think we've talked about it yet today, it's training, it's compensation. That was a big thing for us to think about. How do we compensate folks that were working these intent leads differently than hand raisers or cold leads? So there are many things that you should think about in your system of how you bring this to market, which will make it more or less effective and more or less palatable to your sales colleagues.
Yeah, and that's all part of the rewards. Also the praise and stuff you talked about, the people that were successful, putting them on a pedestal, showcasing all their great work.
We had this amazing quote that we used a lot, and I think Mike Burton knows this quote because I've shared it with him. But we had one of those early adopters who said, "My voice is tired because I've spent so much time on the phone today." And the difference was, right, in the old world, cold calling, it was hang up, hang up, hang up. And very infrequently did you have an actual material phone call. And the change here was we were getting folks on the phone who were in market, who were interested in having the conversation, but that way of articulating it was like wildfire for American Express.
That's neat.
Very tangible.
Yeah.
It's interesting too, just to build on that. So we started with a smaller group of people as well, right? So we have a couple hundred account executives. We actually picked 15 of them. And one of the things that we went through in the process with the head of sales was half of them were the top performers, and we purposely picked, quite frankly, the other half were bottom performers. And so we actually had some focus groups and feedback calls before we kicked off, and one of them literally said to us, "I will never use this." And it was actually like the rallying cry for all of us to be like, our goal now is to get John
We all
want to use this, right?
Got to picture that person.
Yeah. But it actually was really motivating because it was a completely different way of thinking about it, right? In terms of getting some of the less digital savvy and potentially low performing sales team members to actually figure out how to actually leverage this to their benefit. Because to your point, it impacts compensation models, et cetera. So,
yeah. So Paul, I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. Same kind of idea, but you started with a grandiose plan. How long ago was that? Just roughly?
5 years.
5 years ago. Wow. Okay. So talk just a little, quickly set up what you started as and kind of where you are today. Because I will have to say, this group is all pioneers. I don't know what the right word, but you guys went all in and believe in a new way to disrupt. But just talk a little bit about that setup of the platform concept, and then how you moved into this and the role Intent played.
And then where I am today?
Yeah.
Okay, I promise not to cry. So where we where we started was honestly, it's more than intent, right? So where we started was data, right? And this is all account based, and I'm not a big fan of ABM, but it's account based. So how can we work with a set of accounts? How can we bring data together to enrich those accounts, make what we know about those accounts more important, better, accurate, intent, of course, being critical to it. We also use the Bombora Visitor Insights tag for website. So we heard from our sales teams, like any account that's on the website, right? Those are hand raisers. I want those first. And so we took that signal. I'm not sure where do's and don'ts come into this, but one of my biggest mistakes in life was trusting our CRM data. And so the first year, right, I found myself in trouble because I got blamed for that. And so a big pivot for us was to realize that this is account-based, and I don't need all the accounts. I just need the good accounts. And so we spent a lot of time cleaning and enriching accounts, working with the sales team, working with marketing, but all of a sudden the light bulb went off. I don't need to own all of these accounts. I just need to own the ones that we're bringing to their attention. And so, firmographic, we were like a little baby to what SAP Crystal Ball is, but we had predictive models, and we spent a lot of time making sure that our data house was in order. So when we activation could be Salesforce, could be Marketo, ad platforms. We're a channel-led organization, data out to our channel. We're all singing from kind of the same hymn book. And so we spent a lot of time activating. The one thing I will say, and I loved Franklin's comment, like they started out in Excel, so did we, right? Like you can't just go to a platform.
Started out in Excel.
Yeah.
I mean, no shit, right?
Okay. No shame to it.
We sent it to
No
our sales
shame.
team.
Yeah.
Look at this.
Right. And so, some of this stuff takes time. The reality of it is, we don't have time. So you have to choose your use cases really well. Use case could be marketing, could be sales, could be others. And how do you take that intent data and layer it in to activate the account? And activation is the critical piece to all of this. And so, we started small. My one word of advice around sales is find hunters, right? You need people who are willing to learn a new trade and how to take data and become successful with it. I love the thought about taking a team that might not be as successful as others and making them successful. Boy, that's a take-home checkbox. And so, where we are today is I'm back to, we still have the system running. The data hasn't really changed. We've simplified it. That was another big mistake. Like sales and marketing, funny enough, marketing doesn't want to be a data scientist. They want the data to tell them what to do. So which accounts, what's the storyline, what's the content, what's the message, simply, right? And here I am, my biggest mistake, I loved what I put together. Honestly, no one else, they don't care about it. They don't care about the technology. They don't care about the vendors. I was damn proud of it, and I talked about it. What a big mistake. How am I going to make their lives as marketers or salespeople better? For marketers, help them understand how they're contributing to revenue, and then salespeople make them more money. That's all they care about. And so it took me 2 years to figure that out. And now I'm taking all of those learnings. I'm back to sales pilots. I'm working with a couple of groups. It's more than just data activation, So our data, we have a whole slew of accounts that don't sit in CRM. And so now they're coming to my group to help them build a TAM to execute off of. So it's been a fascinating story. Learned a ton, made a ton of mistakes. Make mistakes, make them fast, move on. But the small use cases of understanding what you're going to do, whether it's demand gen for marketing, sales account activation, and there's other use cases, understanding those, being able to measure them and prove the ROI and value is key. And honestly, don't get to the point like, oh, we have a small team, I can't do all of this. Choose a couple of things, do it quick, do it well, and then move on.
Well, I think that's the idea behind the Bombora application framework, right? That we talked about earlier, because you talked about cross-sell, upsell, and some of the things that needed to happen. You just talked about total available market and doing go-to-market planning. So there are some nuggets along the way. That's probably another lesson. We don't necessarily just want to get obsessed with sales and marketing alignment. If you focus on that challenge, I think that's a tough ask. There's a little bit of Venus and Mars there, and the business changes, but the overall picture, keeping that. But I'm going to go to you on a question. Just what role do you think intent can play today? And you could kind of recast your story a little bit. What role do you think intent can play today in bringing sales and marketing together? Any specific things there, or even lessons learned along the way?
I think lessons learned along the way, at least for me, things that I think are important. One is, I think it's not just about sales and marketing. That's really important. I think when you've heard the stories of today, and we'll continue to hear, think about who else is influential in your organization that will help bring this to life. So at American Express, like data science, both because of the skills that they had, but also literally the influence they had in the organization. So they were a really key partner. At Cision, it's really our finance team, right? And so thinking about, yes, you might be trying to drive alignment with sales and marketing, and I think for Franklin, it was many, many folks, but think about who else in your cross-functional sort of world would be helpful to help you bring this to life.
Why finance?
Because they make a lot of decisions. Yeah, I mean, I think
They can be the office of yes as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think
office of no.
absolutely. I think that for our organization right now, they're the ones that do a lot of impact measurement. And because we're a much smaller organization than American Express is. And so I have really proactively brought them along in terms of the investment that we're making with a partner like Bombora and some of the other infrastructure that we need to bring to life more sophisticated marketing and sales motions, and really working with them to set the metrics that we're going to measure ourselves against.
Bravo. Great move.
Yeah, I mean, I always think like keep your friends close. And
Because the metrics are what's going to keep you funded next
Yes.
year.
the other thing I would say about metrics, in my experience, and this is a juxtaposition of my two experiences, we talk a lot about common metrics. If you can, really carrying the same number between marketing and sales, which I think is different, or the same outcomes, and actually having it be what you are measured against, or your team is measured against, versus just things you are measuring. There's a difference. So at Cision, we're measuring impact, but we haven't gotten to the place where our sales outcomes and our marketing outcomes are the same, and therefore, sort of what we're paid on is the same. At American Express, they were. And I think the closer that you can get to literally carrying the same performance burden as whoever you need to be part of the team, the closer you can get to that, the easier it is to have impact.
I love that line. What we're measuring, you still need important things in marketing to be measuring, so you have optimization and control, but outcomes and rewards, you really focus on rewards, which I think is good.
I always say
advice.
people do what they're paid to do.
All right. So we're going to ask questions from the audience in just a second. Matt, we're going to ask you the questions. So get your questions ready. Things you want to ask, drill into. If you want to go another place, to other questions, we've got a great source of panel here. So Matt,
Can I
same
share
question.
one thing
Yeah,
real quick?
sure.
So picking up a little on what Putney said, one of the aha moments for me in a dialogue with sales is I stopped talking about the way I view it, and I asked them, how do they think about their world, their territory? And then I designed our activation plays using their language. And it was no longer about marketing, right? It was, symbiotic marketing and sales. But at the end of the day, it's how sales talked to their managers about territory management. And now all of a sudden, our activation plays carry their language. And now all of a sudden, I don't need to explain it anymore because I'm talking like I'm a salesperson. And it was really fascinating.
That's a big CRM mistake we've learned from too along the way.
Yeah.
I think just to build on that, I think there was a couple of key takeaways for me. Back to your point on outcomes. So closing ratios, that's all we talked about, right? So the teams were obsessed with improving closing ratios. None of the other marketing metrics, et cetera, were talked about within the core team, maybe the marketing team behind the scenes, but with the business, it was closing ratio, right? And that they were obsessed with moving that. Even a couple of tenths of a percentage point made hundreds of millions of dollars in incremental revenue differences. The second, I think, was start small. So I think, like we've talked about, we piloted this with a handful of people, right? People were for it, detractors, to learn, to test. We personally have migrated over to more agile ways of working. So this was an agile team that was stood up. And we would always tell the team, because they worked in 2-week sprints, right? So you can only be 2 weeks wrong, is what we would tell that team. No matter what you're doing, you can only be 2 weeks wrong. And that team, by the way, was a cross-functional team. So everybody that was working on the project was empowered, and that was sales, the business, finance, and marketing. And it was not a marketing-led initiative. The next thing was, I think, feedback loops. So full transparency, the AEs, getting feedback from them was a nightmare, right? Like, they were busy, like asking them for feedback was tough. So we had a inbox we set up. They could text us. We had weekly calls. We had surveys. We had somebody not in marketing, but from finance stop by their offices. So we literally gave them any way to give us feedback, because any bits and pieces that they can share with us would be able to help us inform what we do next. And so I think working in that kind of agile environment for us allowed the team to be extremely effective in what they were able to do. And I think the last thing for me was just, we had a lot of complications from a data perspective, and I think it could have been very easy in the beginning to just give up, right? In the beginning, we wanted to have the Bombora data integrated with Salesforce, and it was a challenge to do that. And so for us was like, what are those small wins that we can put on the board? And we had the sponsor of this whole thing was the head of sales, right? And so he was the one talking to the team saying, this is what we're trying to do. This is where we're going. It wasn't marketing, right? Or our CMO.
Perfect. Great advice. Questions from the audience? Do we have some mic runners here? We have one over here. Oh, same row. Look at this. Pass the mic.
Thank you all for your talk. So Putney, you Putney, you mentioned that you moved on from firmographic data to behavioral intent data. I was wondering what sorts of behavioral intent data you use, and if you use digital marketing campaigns, how were you able to stitch that data to the same customer?
So we used a variety of signals. So website traffic and website engagement. We used engagement with content and other marketing journeys that our prospects were being exposed to. And we also, and I can't remember at American Express, I think we also had some other intent-related signals. So for example, at Cision right now, we pull competitive activity. So we own PR Newswire. We know when you're sending newswires out on other services, and we're using that, for example, as intent data. At American Express, we already had kind of a crystal ball type. When we started this journey, we already had a pretty sophisticated, what do I want to say, data lake that we were building, and we had a lot of data scientists who were able to help us sort of stitch together the data based on identification of companies that were sitting in our database. So we were able to start building a thicker and thicker file. At Cision, we have a lot messier data. And so right now, where I would say is we have individual intent signals. We haven't been able to yet build the sort of thicker and thicker file. Like I feel like I just keep passing a piece of paper to each sales colleague instead of saying, here's a folder with all the information that you should know. So just different places in terms of sophistication and frankly, resources to put against things.
This is another question for Putney. I'm curious to know, like, tactically, how did you compensate your early adopters? Was that coming from marketing? Was that coming from sales? And was it like tied to a spiff, or was it like ongoing compensation for however many deals they closed using intent data?
The compensation came out of our sales compensation budgets. We actually at American Express had a compensation team that was solely dedicated to, again, like we can juxtapose my two situations because I wouldn't have that today. But we had a compensation team. Initially, when we stood it up, we basically took the downside risk away, right? And said, if you participate, we're going to, I think we set their benchmarks where they had been performing and assumed they would continue performing at that level. And then ultimately, once we'd been further into the journey, we had segmented our team. Rather than having one big team of the 200 folks, we had segmented based on the type of lead they were working. And then we set different payouts by lead type, by card type, because that's how we did it, to reflect essentially what we saw as the difference in difficulty of completing the sale. So our hypothesis, right, was that if we were giving you intent leads, you were going to have more effective conversations, you were going to close at a higher rate, so your per sale payout would be lower. But that was actually really important, right, because we needed, even to this day, I believe that there's still a chunk of people that do cold calling, and that's a really, really hard job, and we needed to compensate them even if they weren't getting the better leads, because in order to be at the scale that American Express needs to be at, we still needed them to stay in their roles. So part of the compensation was about rewarding folks appropriately for the new work they were doing, but frankly, part of it was keeping the folks who didn't get the new stuff happy in their roles.
That's a fine balancing act, isn't it? We're all going, yeah, we got to navigate that one. But that's such an important, as you said.
And try not to change mid-year.
We have to be agile, Matt just showed us.
Yeah.
You're right.
I'll talk about how much
Yeah.
the adaptability. Other questions from the audience for this great group? Anybody else have another question? Right here, over here in the middle.
Hey, Matt. So I'm curious, what happened with John, the sales guy?
John, the sales guy. So we officially, I would say,
last we saw him.
Well,
Promoted twice.
yeah. So John, the sales guy, actually became an advocate for this. He actually went to the head of sales at the time and acknowledged, right, that he bought into it. And we're about to actually, so we started small. We're now scaling this to across multiple regions now within the organization. And our hope is to be able to bring him and quite frankly, some of the others as well on that journey. Again, so it's not us talking about it, right? Me talking about the success of this is going to fall flat. So versus somebody like a John, or we had a few others, right? At first, were very skeptical of even talking to us, actually be the ones almost pitching on our behalf to the rest of the sales organization. So
I do think there's a thing that I would advocate to all of you that you both understand how intent data works and then figure out how you're going to explain the underpinnings, the sort of the science behind it in a digestible and somewhat short way to your sales colleagues and others in your organization. Because I think that in my experience, one, you should always understand what you're buying. But also I think there's a fear of it being sort of black box or like, oh, you're just telling me that this is magic, this is gold.
we got creepy. We literally got the word creepy multiple times.
Right. And so I don't have a magic bullet on how you do that. I think the Bombora team can be really, really helpful, but you need to give enough that your colleagues understand the reason to believe, but not so much that it's sort of overwhelming or creepy or.
Yeah, we had the same issue, quite frankly, right? And we did a lot of sales enablement, training, conversations around how to use it, but also different. So we scenario planned also. So some of the AEs would say, I have relationships where I'm actually happy to talk about almost how the sausage is made because I know that that person would be okay with it. And other people would be like, there's no way I'm telling them how I have access to this. Okay, so what does that look like? And so we built out, quite frankly, a handful of different scenarios for each of the different potential ways to leverage the data.
Yeah, reasons to believe on one hand, and then using their language on the other and getting that language right. So words matter as usual.
I would add to that the element of trust, right? Because we are brothers and sisters in this fight together. What I found really successful is to identify a bunch of closed won business, right? Reps have made money off this, and then go back and do the historical analysis to help them understand this is what you can get in the future. This is where your account was. Here are the topics they were searching on. Here's where on the website they were. Other pieces of data. So you build a backward-looking story to get them to trust what you're talking. They've already closed this business, and then it makes sense to them. So as you start talking about the futures, that trust value's there.
Yeah, even if
really
it's
critical.
Even if it's a little bit manual in the beginning.
It was manual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.